My husband stood up at our anniversary dinner, grabbed his wine glass, and poured it over my head, right in front of my parents. The room went silent. My mother gasped. But what he didn't know? I'd been planning something for months, and his little stunt just made everything easier. Before we get into this story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you're not going to believe how this ends. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every single second. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Gabrielle Thompson, and for 6 years, I was married to Trevor Montgomery, a billionaire tech mogul who owned half the city. From the outside, my life looked like a fairy tale. We lived in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. I wore designer clothes, attended charity galas, and smiled for photos that made us look like the perfect power couple. My Instagram was filled with champagne toasts and vacation photos from islands you couldn't even pronounce. Everyone thought I had it all. But behind those closed doors, behind that perfect smile, I was drowning. Trevor controlled everything. What I wore, who I talked to, what I ate, where I went. He would criticize my weight, my intelligence, my family. He made me feel small, in a penthouse that touched the sky. I grew up in Detroit, in a little house where love was louder than money. My parents, Donald and Beverly, worked hard their whole lives. Dad was a mechanic, Mama was a nurse. They taught me dignity, self-respect, and the value of standing on your own 2 feet. I was a marketing manager at a small firm when I met Trevor at a conference 7 years ago. He was the keynote speaker, confident and charming, talking about innovation and changing the world. After his speech, he walked straight up to me and said I had the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, we were married. I thought I'd won the lottery, but the signs were there from the beginning. I just didn't want to see them. He'd suggest what I should wear. Then it became an expectation. He'd ask who I was texting. Then it became an interrogation. He'd make jokes about my background. Then they became insults. Slowly, I watched my friends disappear because Trevor said they were jealous or bad influences. I stopped going to family gatherings because he always found a reason why we couldn't make it. By year 3, I was isolated, controlled, and convinced that this was just what marriage to a powerful man looked like. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself it could be worse. Then came our 6th anniversary. My parents hadn't visited in almost 2 years because Trevor always made excuses about being too busy to host them. But this time, Mama put her foot down. She said they were coming for our anniversary weekend. And that was that. Trevor wasn't happy, but he agreed, probably because he wanted to show off. He made reservations at Shell, this exclusive French restaurant where he was a partial owner. The night of our anniversary, I wore a green dress that I actually loved, which was rare because Trevor usually picked my outfits. My parents arrived at the restaurant looking nervous and out of place. Dad wore his best suit, the one he'd bought 20 years ago for my college graduation. Mama had on her church dress and her good pearls. They looked so small in that big fancy restaurant with its crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed plates. But they were smiling, happy to celebrate with us. Trevor barely looked up from his phone when they arrived. Didn't hug my mother, didn't shake my father's hand. Just nodded and went back to typing. I watched my father's smile fade just a little, and something in my chest tightened. Throughout dinner, Trevor was distant and cold. My parents tried to make conversation, asking about his business, complimenting the restaurant. He gave one-word answers, his eyes never leaving his phone. When the waiter came to take our order, I did something I normally never did. I ordered for myself. I didn't ask Trevor what he thought I should have. I just ordered the salmon with the cream sauce and a side salad. It seems like such a small thing, doesn't it? But in my marriage, that was an act of rebellion. I saw Trevor's jaw tighten, but he didn't say anything right away. The food came, and we ate in uncomfortable silence while my parents tried to fill the space with cheerful stories about their neighbors back home. Then I did it again. I ordered dessert, the chocolate souffle. Trevor put down his fork and stared at me. The air changed. I could feel it coming like a storm rolling in. He said loud enough for nearby tables to hear that maybe I should think about skipping dessert, since I'd been eating too much lately anyway. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My father's face went hard. Mama said, soft but firm, that I looked beautiful and to leave me alone. That's when Trevor stood up. I'll never forget the look on his face, cold, controlled rage. He picked up his wine glass, held it above my head, and said loud enough for everyone to hear that if I wanted to embarrass him, he'd show me what real embarrassment looked like. Then he poured it, slow and deliberate. The red wine ran down my face, my neck, soaking into my green dress and turning it black. I sat there frozen, feeling it drip onto my lap, while the entire restaurant stared at us. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My mother made a sound like she'd been punched. My father started to stand, his fists clenched. But Trevor's security guard stepped forward with his hand up. Trevor dropped the empty glass on the table, straightened his jacket, and walked out without another word. Just left me sitting there, dripping with wine and shame, while my parents looked at me with horror and heartbreak. The restaurant manager rushed over with towels, apologizing like it was his fault. Other diners pretended to look away, but I could feel their eyes on me, their whispers spreading like fire. My father helped me up, his hands shaking with rage or grief, or both. Mama wrapped her coat around my shoulders, and we left that restaurant while everyone watched the billionaire's wife walk out looking like a victim, because that's exactly what I was. We went back to their hotel room, and I didn't go home that night. I sat on the edge of their hotel bed, still in my wine-stained dress, and I broke down, not just crying, but the kind of sobbing that comes from 6 years of holding everything in. My mother held me while my father paced the room. That's when Mama told me something I never knew. She said that before she married my father, she'd been married to someone else, a man who hurt her, controlled her, made her feel worthless. She stayed for 3 years before she finally found the courage to leave. She recognized what was happening to me because she'd lived it herself. My father sat down next to us, tears in his eyes, and said he blamed himself for not seeing it sooner. He wanted to go back to that penthouse and confront Trevor right then. But I stopped him. I told them something I'd never told anyone. This wasn't the first time. The wine was just the first public humiliation. Behind closed doors, there had been so much worse. Grabbed arms, pushed shoulders, holes punched in walls next to my head. Words that cut deeper than any fist. I'd been living in fear, walking on eggshells, losing pieces of myself every single day. But then I told them what they didn't know. For the past 8 months, I'd been working with a lawyer named Mrs. Adiezi Okonkwo. I'd been documenting everything, taking photos of bruises with timestamps, recording conversations on my phone, copying financial documents when Trevor thought I was too stupid to understand them. I had a folder with evidence that would destroy him. The prenup he made me sign was brutal. If I left, I'd get almost nothing. But Mrs. Okonkwo had found something beautiful. Trevor had forged documents during our prenup negotiations. He'd lied about his assets, hidden accounts, manipulated me into signing under false pretenses. That prenup wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. I'd been building my case slowly, carefully, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then Trevor went and poured wine on my head, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras from other diners' phones, in front of my parents. He'd just handed me the final piece I needed. Public humiliation, documented abuse. I looked at my parents and told them that I was waiting. It was time to take Trevor Montgomery down. The next morning, I met with Mrs. Okonkwo in her office. She was a strong, no-nonsense woman, in her 50s, who specialized in high-profile divorces. When I walked in, still wearing yesterday's makeup and borrowed clothes from my mother, she took one look at me and said it was time to go to war. We spread out all my evidence on her conference table. Photos, recordings, financial documents. It was 8 months of work, and it was devastating. But then something unexpected happened. Trevor's personal assistant, a woman named Nicole Parker, called Mrs. Okonkwo's office asking for a meeting. Nicole had worked for Trevor for 4 years. She'd seen everything, and she wanted to help me take him down. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop far from downtown. Nicole brought a laptop and a flash drive, and what she showed us changed everything. She had access to Trevor's private emails, his real financial records, everything he'd tried to hide. She told me about offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, worth over $200 million. She showed me emails to his mistresses, at least 3 different women he'd been seeing throughout our marriage. But more than that, she had evidence of financial fraud. Trevor had been lying to his investors, cooking his company's books, hiding losses, and inflating profits. He wasn't just an abusive husband, he was a criminal. Nicole told me she was doing this because Trevor had harassed her for years. Inappropriate comments, unwanted touching, threats when she rejected him. She'd signed an NDA when she took the job, but she didn't care anymore. She was willing to risk everything to see him face consequences. Over the next week, more people came forward. The housekeeper who'd seen him grab me. The driver who'd heard him threaten me. A business partner's ex-wife who had her own story about Trevor's cruelty. Even some of his own employees who were tired of being mistreated and were ready to testify. It was like breaking a dam. Once one person was brave enough to speak, others found their courage too. Mrs. Okonkwo worked day and night, putting together our case. She also contacted a friend who worked with federal investigators. Turns out, they'd already been looking into Trevor's business practices. My evidence and Nicole's files gave them everything they needed to move forward with criminal charges. We had him. We planned everything carefully. Trevor's company had its annual board meeting scheduled in 1 week. Mrs. Okonkwo suggested we make our move there, in front of the board members, in front of his colleagues and investors. Maximum impact. I was terrified, but I was also ready. The night before the board meeting, I stayed awake, thinking about everything. 6 years of my life spent making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. 6 years of apologizing for things that weren't my fault. 6 years of believing I deserved the way he treated me. That was ending tomorrow. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. A black pantsuit that made me feel powerful. My mother's pearls around my neck for courage. I met Mrs. Okonkwo outside Trevor's office building downtown. She had 2 federal agents with her. We walked into that glass tower together, and I felt like I was floating. The receptionist's eyes went wide when she saw me. I hadn't been to Trevor's office in months. He'd told me I was too distracting, that I didn't understand business, that I should stay home. We took the elevator to the top floor where the boardroom was. Through the glass walls, I could see Trevor at the head of the long table, mid-presentation, confident and in control. He had no idea what was coming. Mrs. Okonkwo opened the door, and we walked in. Trevor stopped talking mid-sentence. His face went from confusion to anger in seconds. He told us to get out, that this was a private meeting. But the board president, an older man named Mr. Lawrence, held up his hand and asked what this was about. Mrs. Okonkwo introduced herself and the federal agents. She said they were here regarding serious allegations of fraud and abuse against Trevor Montgomery. You could hear people shifting in their seats. Trevor tried to take control, saying this was harassment, that I was a disgruntled spouse trying to extort him. He told the board not to listen to anything I said. That's when Mrs. Okonkwo opened her briefcase. She handed out folders to each board member. Inside was a summary of evidence: financial fraud, documented abuse, witness statements. I watched their faces as they read. Some looked shocked. Some looked disgusted. A few didn't look surprised at all. Then Nicole walked in. Trevor's face went white. His own assistant, the woman who knew all his secrets, stood next to me. She told the board she had additional evidence of financial improprieties, harassment, and fraud. She handed over her flash drive. Trevor started yelling then, calling her a liar, calling me a gold digger, saying we were both trying to destroy him because we were bitter and jealous. His voice got louder and louder, more desperate. The federal agents stepped forward. They told Trevor they had a warrant to investigate his business for wire fraud, tax evasion, and investor fraud. They weren't arresting him yet, but they would need him to come in for questioning. The board members were standing now, some arguing, some on their phones calling their lawyers. The board president asked Trevor directly if these allegations were true. Trevor looked around the room, realizing he was losing control. He pointed at me and said, this was all my fault, that I'd been a terrible wife, that I'd embarrassed him, that I'd driven him to his breaking point. He actually said that I'd driven him to pour wine on my head. Mr. Lawrence looked at Trevor with disgust and said the board would be voting immediately to suspend him pending investigation. Trevor lunged toward me then, and security had to hold him back. He was screaming that I'd regret this, that I'd get nothing, that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Mrs. Okonkwo calmly walked forward and handed him divorce papers. She told him that due to fraud in the creation of our prenuptial agreement, it was null and void. I was entitled to half of everything. She also informed him that we had documented evidence of hidden assets that he'd failed to disclose. His face went from red to gray. Security escorted him out of his own building while he shouted threats. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. I stood there in that boardroom, surrounded by strangers and lawyers and chaos, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years: free. The next 3 months were a blur of legal proceedings, depositions, and negotiations. Trevor fought everything, but he was drowning in evidence. The federal investigation expanded. They found more fraud than even Nicole had known about. He was looking at serious prison time. His lawyers advised him to settle the divorce quickly and focus on his criminal defense. I ended up with $400 million, the penthouse, and several properties. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was standing up. The victory was saying enough. The victory was showing other women that you can escape, that you can fight back, that you don't have to accept being treated as less than human. I bought my parents a beautiful house with a big backyard where Mama could plant her garden. The first time my father saw it, he cried, just stood in the driveway and cried. They'd worked their whole lives and never imagined living somewhere so nice. I started a foundation for women escaping abusive relationships. Mrs. Okonkwo became our legal director. Nicole became our head of operations. We helped women get lawyers, find safe housing, rebuild their lives. Several other women who'd been hurt by Trevor came forward and joined us. We turned our pain into purpose. I cut my hair short because I wanted to. I wore jeans and sneakers because they were comfortable. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost during my marriage. I laughed again, real laughs that came from my belly. I remembered who I was before Trevor tried to erase me. 6 months after that board meeting, we held our foundation's first major fundraising event. I stood at a podium in front of hundreds of people, survivors and supporters, and I told my story. I told them about the wine, about the fear, about finding the courage to fight back. I said that the wine Trevor poured on my head was meant to humiliate me, to break me, to remind me that he had all the power. But instead, it washed away my fear. It was the baptism I needed to become who I was always meant to be. Trevor's cruelty gave me a public moment that made other people brave enough to come forward. His worst act became the catalyst for his downfall. So that's how a glass of wine changed everything. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. If you or someone you know is in a situation like mine, please know there is a way out. I've put resources in the description below. Subscribe, because I've got more stories about turning your worst moments into your greatest victories. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done. I'll see you in the next one.